In 1921, a Philadelphia banker finished building what would become the third largest private residence in the United States, 147 rooms, 100,000 square feet, $10 million in construction costs. That's $160 million in today's money. The estate took 5 years to build and required 70 staff members just to keep it running. And here's what makes this story different from every other Gilded Age mansion story you've heard. This house didn't survive a century. It didn't become a museum. It didn't get donated to a university. It was demolished in 1980, completely erased, the largest American house ever to be demolished on purpose. Today, cheap townhouses sit where marble halls once stood. The owner who built it died almost broke. His fortune collapsed from $100 million to $4 million. That's from $1.8 billion to $100 million in today's money. His widow sold the entire estate for $167,000, a 98% loss. And here's what no one's talking about. This wasn't just about the Great Depression. This wasn't just about bad luck. This was about a fundamental miscalculation that destroyed one of America's greatest fortunes. And it's a mistake that's being repeated right now by athletes, entrepreneurs, and lottery winners across the country. If you're ready to see what really happened and why this story matters more today than ever, let's begin. Edward Townsend Stotesbury was born in 1849 to a middle-class Quaker family in Philadelphia. He started working at Drexel and Company at 17 years old. His starting salary was $16.60 per month. That's about $370 in today's money. He wasn't born into wealth. He wasn't handed anything. For decades, Stotesbury lived modestly. He worked 12-hour days. He learned every aspect of banking from the ground up. He earned his partnership through sheer competence and dedication. By 1882, he became a partner at Drexel and Company. When the firm merged with J.P. Morgan, Stotesbury became Morgan's number 2. J.P. Morgan himself said Stotesbury knew more about the details of banking than any other man in the United States. This wasn't an exaggeration. Stotesbury helped finance American railroads. He helped form U.S. Steel Corporation. He floated international loans to Mexico and China. He arranged the financing for the Pennsylvania Railroad expansion. He underwrote bonds for municipal projects across the country. He sat on the boards of dozens of major corporations. His financial expertise was unmatched. By 1927, his fortune stood at $100 million, $1.8 billion in today's dollars. He was the wealthiest man in Philadelphia, possibly one of the 10 wealthiest men in America. He had achieved what few Americans ever achieve, true financial independence built over 5 decades of disciplined work. But here's where the story takes its turn. In 1912, after being a widower for 30 years, Stotesbury married Eva Roberts Cromwell. Eva was a widow herself, a socialite who understood how to move in elite circles. She had been married to Oliver Eaton Cromwell, a New York broker. She knew the lifestyle of the ultra-wealthy. She had connections to the highest levels of East Coast society. And Eva had ambitions. She looked at Stotesbury's Rittenhouse Square townhouse and saw something too small, too modest, not befitting a man of his stature. Eva wanted to compete with the great houses of the era. She wanted to rival the Vanderbilts. She wanted a palace that would make Philadelphia remember the Stotesbury name forever. So, in 1916, Stotesbury did what any man in love would do. He purchased 300 acres in rural Springfield, Pennsylvania, and he hired Horace Trumbauer, the architect who designed the Philadelphia Museum of Art, to build Eva her palace. Wait a minute, let's look at what he actually built. 147 rooms across 100,000 square feet, 6 stories, 3 above ground, 3 below, 45 bathrooms, a ballroom 64 feet long with 20-foot ceilings, a gymnasium with the latest equipment, a movie theater with velvet seats, a refrigeration plant the size of a commercial facility, 4 large greenhouses for growing trees and ferns, plus smaller ones just for flowers to decorate the house. The entrance hall featured walls of imported Caen stone. The main staircase was modeled after the one at Fontainebleau. Bathrooms with bronze dolphin faucets, 5 by 10-foot gilt mirrors watching over the staircases. marble statues that once belonged to King Frederick the Great of Prussia. The library held thousands of rare books in hand-tooled leather bindings. The dining room could seat 40 people comfortably. Crystal chandeliers hung in nearly every major room. Persian rugs covered marble floors. Tapestries from the 16th century decorated the walls. The pipe organ alone reached up 3 stories. Ava loved organ music. It played continuously during afternoons and evenings when they had guests. A full-time organist was on staff just to keep the music flowing. The gardens were designed by Jacques Grébert in the grand style of Versailles. Formal French gardens with geometrically arranged hedges, fountains imported from Italy, statuary placed according to classical principles, a reflecting pool that stretched for hundreds of feet, stone balustrades and ornamental urns positioned throughout the grounds. More than 70 gardeners worked full-time maintaining the grounds. They manicured the lawns with 20 motorized mowers. They maintained the 4 massive greenhouses. They replaced flowers daily in the mansion's vases and arrangements. The inside staff usually numbered 40 maids, butlers, cooks, footmen, housekeepers. Add them together, you're looking at over 110 employees just for one house. And here's the kicker. This was just one of 3 palatial estates the couple built. They also constructed El Mirasol in Palm Beach, Florida, a Mediterranean revival palace with its own staff and grounds, and Wingwood House in Bar Harbor, Maine, a summer cottage that would make most mansions look modest. The staff would follow the Stotesburys on their yearly pilgrimages, 6 months at Whitemarsh, winters in Florida, summers in Maine. Imagine the logistics. Moving 110 people 3 times a year, transporting personal belongings, artwork, clothing, pets. Maintaining 3 separate estates simultaneously, 3 massive estates, over 140 full-time staff across all properties, continuous migrations between properties. Each move cost tens of thousands of dollars just in transportation and logistics. Construction wrapped in 1921 at a total cost of approximately $10 million. That includes the land, the construction, the landscaping, the furnishings, the artwork. $10 million in 1921 money, $160 million in today's dollars. But that wasn't the real problem. The real problem was what came next. Everyone focuses on the construction cost, $10 million, $160 million in today's money. That's what gets the headlines. But that wasn't what killed this mansion. Let me show you the numbers that actually mattered. Stotesbury declared it cost him over $1 million a year to maintain Whitemarsh Hall and its property. $1 million. Every single year. That's $18 million annually in today's money. Think about that for a second. The construction cost was $10 million. The annual maintenance was $1 million. In just 10 years, the maintenance costs equaled the entire construction price. In 20 years, you've paid for the house twice over just in upkeep, but that wasn't the real problem either. Here's what no one understood at the time. Stotesbury's income, massive as it was, came from being a partner in banking firms. His wealth was tied to commissions, fees, and the performance of financial markets. As senior partner in Drexel & Company and J.P. Morgan & Company, his fortune was deeply connected to equity and bond markets. When those markets thrived, he made millions. When they contracted, his income collapsed. But his expenses? Those $1 million per year in maintenance costs? Those didn't contract. Those didn't adjust based on market conditions. 70 groundsmen with 20 motorized mowers, 40 domestic servants, heating and cooling 100,000 square feet, maintaining 4 massive greenhouses, importing flowers weekly for decorations, fixed costs on variable income. That's the trap. And Stotesbury wasn't just maintaining one estate, he was maintaining 3. Each one had its own army of staff. Each one had its own enormous operating budget. Between 1921 and 1929, this system worked. The stock market roared. Banking commissions flowed. Stotesbury could afford to spend $1 million a year on Whitemarsh alone, plus whatever El Mirasol and Wingwood House cost to maintain. But here's the part everyone misses. The Stotesburys weren't just maintaining these houses, they frequently held parties for 600 or more people at once, floodlighting the house for these occasions. When they christened Whitemarsh with a ball in 1921, 800 people attended, including the future King Gustav VI of Sweden and Marshal Joseph Joffre. They hosted annual debutante balls, themed costume balls, and garden parties. Each party cost tens of thousands of dollars. Orchestras, imported food, transportation for guests, lodging, security. So when people ask, how did Stotesbury lose his fortune? The answer isn't just the Great Depression. The answer is that he built a financial structure that required perpetual market growth to sustain. And when that growth stopped, the entire structure collapsed in months. October 1929. The stock market crashed, but the Stotesburys didn't panic immediately. For about 9 years, the mansion had been the site of lavish balls and receptions. Wealthy people had survived market corrections before, but this wasn't a correction. This was a depression. The Wall Street crash precipitated a sharp decline in securities values, directly hitting financiers like Stotesbury. Remember, his wealth was tied to financial markets. As stocks plummeted, his net worth evaporated. As banking activity contracted, his commissions disappeared. The intensity of the party life dropped after the crash in 1929. By 1933, the Stotesburys were openly criticized for enjoying a life of splendor while most of the country suffered. The criticism stung. The party stopped almost entirely. But the expenses? They continued. $1 million per year at Whitemarsh, more at the other estates, the 70 gardeners, the 40 servants, the heating bills, the maintenance, the insurance. In 1932, Stotesbury shuttered the mansion, let most of his staff go, and allowed the grounds to go to seed. Think about that timeline. The crash happened in October 1929. By 1932, just 3 years later, he couldn't afford to keep his primary residence open. 3 years. From the height of American wealth to shuttering a palace. Here's what the numbers looked like. Between 1933 and 1938, Stotesbury withdrew over $55 million from his J.P. Morgan accounts. $55 million. He was liquidating everything just to stay afloat. In 1912, Stotesbury was worth $100 million. At his death in 1938, he was worth just $4 million. That's a 96% loss. From $1.8 billion in today's money to $100 million, gone in 26 years. But wait, it gets worse. On May 16, 1938, Stotesbury died at age 89. Eva Stotesbury discovered after his death that she was relatively broke. The $4 million estate had to support 3 massive properties, remaining staff, and her lifestyle. The income from the trust wasn't nearly enough. Eva had to get rid of many servants who had been with her for over 20 years. She sold many of Stotesbury's beloved portraits, much of Whitemarsh's exquisite furniture, and even jewelry, including a diamond pendant worth $500,000 in 1912. Despite all this, she got comparatively little in return. Depression-era pricing destroyed the value of luxury goods. Art that cost hundreds of thousands sold for thousands. Furniture that cost fortunes sold for pennies on the dollar. The market for ultra-luxury items had completely collapsed. Eva closed the mansion and moved to El Mirasol in Palm Beach. Whitemarsh Hall, the American Versailles, the $10 million palace, sat empty. Eva put Whitemarsh Hall on the market after her husband's death, but there were no buyers. Think about that. The third largest private residence in the United States, built just 17 years earlier for $10 million, and no one wanted it. Why not? Because the annual maintenance costs were still there. Any buyer would inherit that $1 million per year burden. During the Depression, when people were standing in bread lines who wanted to buy a palace that cost more to maintain than most people earned in a lifetime, the property sat on the market for 5 years. 5 years without a single serious buyer. Finally, in 1943, the property sold for $167,000 to the Pennsylvania Salt Manufacturing Company. $167,000. Let me put that in perspective. Construction cost, $10 million. Sale price, $167,000. That's a 98.3% loss. If you adjusted for inflation, the loss would be even more catastrophic. The construction cost in today's money would be $160 million. The sale price would be about $3 million today. A 98% loss even after adjusting for inflation. And here's the really painful part. Much of the ground surrounding the mansion were sold for real estate development separately. The 300-acre estate was broken up and sold in pieces. The unified vision was shattered. Pennsylvania Salt Manufacturing Company converted the mansion into a research laboratory. In 1963, the company built a new research center in King of Prussia and moved out. Whitemarsh Hall stood vacant again. The property was sold to an investment group, but efforts to preserve or sell the mansion intact by successive owners were unsuccessful. As the property became neglected and vandalized over the following years, demolition was decided upon. The copper roof was ripped off by burglars, exposing the mansion to the elements: water damage, vandalism, broken windows, collapsed ceilings. The palace became a ruin. In 1976, developer J. Gross bought the stripped mansion and remaining 46 acres. In 1980, he demolished it. He built 183 townhomes on the property and called the development Stotesbury Estates. The largest American house ever demolished on purpose, erased completely. 59 years from completion to demolition, the massive limestone pillars from the front portico were left in place as a tribute, along with the large belvedere at the back. Small remnants of the garden still exist today, including a fountain, several statues, stairs, and pieces of low stone fence. That's all that remains of a $10 million palace. Two-thirds through this story, let me tell you the 5 reasons why this history gets buried and why you've probably never heard of Whitemarsh Hall, despite it being the 3rd largest private residence in American history. Reason 1. The wealthy don't advertise their failures. The Stotesbury family lost nearly everything. Eva Stotesbury's stepchildren married into prominent families, including General Douglas MacArthur and heiress Doris Duke. These families had every incentive to let this story fade into obscurity. Financial collapse carries stigma. Admitting that your grandfather burned through $1.8 billion in today's money and died nearly broke doesn't help family reputation. So the story gets minimized, buried, forgotten. Reason 2. The real estate and development industries benefit from the silence. Whitemarsh Hall's story is a cautionary tale about overbuilding, about creating assets that cost more to maintain than they generate in value. The real estate industry profits from selling people on bigger houses, bigger estates, more square footage. If people understood what happened at Whitemarsh Hall, that excessive size becomes a financial prison. It might change buying behavior. So the story doesn't get promoted. It doesn't appear in real estate marketing materials. It's not taught in architecture schools as a warning. Reason 3. Economic textbooks focus on market crashes, not personal financial mismanagement. When economists discuss the Great Depression, they talk about systemic collapse, bank failures, unemployment rates. They don't discuss individual cases like Stotesbury because it complicates the narrative. The truth is that Stotesbury's collapse wasn't just about the Depression. It was about building a financial structure with fixed costs exceeding sustainable income levels. That's a personal finance lesson, not a macroeconomic one. And personal finance lessons don't make it into economic history books. Reason 4. The physical evidence was erased. Most Gilded Age mansions still exist in some form. The Breakers in Newport, Biltmore Estate in North Carolina. These serve as physical reminders and tourist destinations, but Whitemarsh Hall was completely demolished. No tours, no museum, no preservation society fighting to keep the memory alive. When the physical structure disappears, the story disappears with it. The founding of the Springfield Township Historical Society in 1985 was a direct response to the demolition, but by then the damage was done. Reason 5. The lesson is too uncomfortable for modern sensibilities. Stotesbury's story teaches us that display destroys wealth while savings builds it. That conspicuous consumption leads to financial ruin. That maintaining appearances costs more than building them. These lessons run counter to Instagram culture, influencer lifestyles, and the entire luxury goods industry. In an era where people finance luxury cars they can't afford and buy houses at the maximum of their mortgage approval, Whitemarsh Hall's story is a mirror nobody wants to look into. So, the story stays buried. Reason 6. Financial institutions don't want the association. J.P. Morgan and Company is still a major financial player today as J.P. Morgan Chase. Having one of their most prominent historical partners die, nearly broke after spectacular financial mismanagement, isn't great for the brand. The banking industry prefers to highlight their successful clients, not the cautionary tales. So Stotesbury's name doesn't appear in J.P. Morgan's corporate history materials. It doesn't get mentioned in financial planning seminars. The connection gets quietly severed. Reason 7. It challenges the narrative of American exceptionalism. We love stories about the Gilded Age. We romanticize the grandeur. We watch period dramas set in mansions like Whitemarsh Hall. We admire the ambition and scale. But we don't like acknowledging that most of these palaces failed economically, that they were financially unsustainable from day one, that the lifestyle they represented was built on market bubbles and ended in bankruptcy. Admitting this means admitting that an entire era of American wealth was a house of cards. And that's a truth we'd rather not confront. You think this story is ancient history? Let me show you how it's repeating today. Professional athletes sign $200 million contracts. Within 5 years of retirement, 78% are broke or financially struggling, according to Sports Illustrated research. Same pattern: high variable income, fixed luxury expenses, market conditions change, income disappears, expenses remain, financial ruin. Mike Tyson earned over $400 million in his boxing career. He filed for bankruptcy in 2003 with $23 million in debt. He owned mansions he couldn't maintain. He had a staff of dozens. He spent millions annually on lifestyle expenses. Sound familiar? Antoine Walker earned $110 million playing in the NBA. He filed for bankruptcy in 2010. Allen Iverson earned $200 million, broke. Terrell Owens, $80 million earned, broke. The pattern repeats: high income, excessive fixed costs, market changes, collapse. But it's not just athletes. Tech entrepreneurs do this constantly. They build companies, make millions on paper, and immediately upgrade their lifestyles to match their net worth. Then the market corrects. The stock options become worthless, but the mansion in Silicon Valley still has a $50,000 monthly mortgage. The luxury car payments don't stop. The private school tuition is still due. Lottery winners are even worse. Research shows that lottery winners are more likely to declare bankruptcy within 3 to 5 years than the average American. They get a windfall. They buy the mansion. They buy the cars. They support extended family. Fixed expenses on a one-time windfall. When the money runs out, the expenses remain. Same trap that caught Stotesbury. Even ordinary people fall into this. Someone gets a promotion and immediately finances a bigger house, a new car, private school for the kids. Then they lose the job, or the industry contracts, or the company downsizes. Variable income, fixed expenses. The Whitemarsh Hall pattern on a smaller scale. And here's what makes it worse today. Social media pressure, Instagram lifestyle, everyone broadcasting their highlight reels. The pressure to display wealth has never been higher. People finance luxury vacations they can't afford. They lease cars beyond their means. They rent luxury apartments to maintain appearances, all while their actual financial foundation crumbles. Stotesbury at least had real wealth before he overextended. Today's version involves people who never had the wealth in the first place, just borrowing to fake it. Let's break down the exact math of how this happens, because this is the part that matters. Stotesbury's case provides the perfect formula for financial destruction, and once you understand this formula, you'll see it everywhere. Start with this equation: annual expenses divided by safe withdrawal rate equals required net worth. If you want to spend $1 million per year sustainably, and you use a 4% safe withdrawal rate, the standard in financial planning, you need $25 million in invested assets generating returns. Stotesbury was spending at least $1 million annually just on Whitemarsh Hall. Add El Mirasol. Add Wingwood House. Add personal expenses, staff, travel, parties, charitable contributions. Conservative estimate, $3 million per year in total expenses. That's $54 million in today's money, every single year. Using a 4% safe withdrawal rate, he needed $75 million in invested assets to sustain that lifestyle forever. He had $100 million in 1927. Sounds fine, right? He's spending $3 million with $100 million in assets. That's only 3% of his net worth annually. Totally sustainable. Wrong. Because that $100 million wasn't sitting in treasury bonds generating safe income. It was tied up in equity and bond markets, exposed to market volatility. It was in stock positions, in corporate bonds, in partnership stakes that could lose value overnight. When the market crashed, the asset base collapsed. Suddenly, he didn't have $100 million. He had $50 million, then $30 million, then $20 million. But the expenses, still $3 million per year. The 70 gardeners still needed salaries. The 40 servants still needed wages. The heating bills for 100,000 square feet didn't decrease. The insurance costs didn't drop. The maintenance on 3 estates didn't pause just because the stock market crashed. Now he's spending 15% of his net worth annually. That's unsustainable. You're guaranteed to go broke. The mathematics don't lie. So he starts liquidating. He withdrew over $55 million between 1933 and 1938. That's not a typo. $55 million withdrawn in 5 years, $11 million per year on average. He's selling stocks at depression prices, taking 50-cent losses on every dollar of value. He's liquidating bonds at massive discounts. He's taking enormous losses just to fund operations. Each sale reduces the asset base further, which means next year he needs to sell even more just to generate the same cash. The portfolio shrinks, the income shrinks, but the expenses stay constant. Death spiral. This is why he ended up with only $4 million. He didn't lose money in the crash and recover. He lost money in the crash and then spent the recovery period liquidating at terrible prices just to maintain his lifestyle as long as possible. He turned a temporary market crash into permanent wealth destruction. The math is brutal. And it's the same math that destroys every fortune built this way. High fixed costs on volatile income or volatile asset values. The moment the market turns, you're finished. There's no recovery. There's only slow motion bankruptcy. But here's what makes this even more devastating. If Stotesbury had just cut expenses immediately in 1929, he could have survived. If he'd closed Whitemarsh, sold El Mirasol, downsized to a normal upper-class lifestyle, say $300,000 per year instead of $3 million, his remaining $50 million would have been more than enough. At $300,000 in annual expenses, he could have lived another 50 years without ever touching the principal. He could have passed on a $50 million fortune to his heirs. That's $1.3 billion in today's money. His family would still be wealthy today. But he couldn't do it. Eva couldn't do it. They couldn't imagine giving up Whitemarsh, couldn't bear to dismiss the staff, couldn't face the social humiliation of downsizing. So they held on for 3 years, burning through millions, until they literally couldn't afford to keep the lights on anymore. Pride cost them everything. Display destroys wealth. Savings builds it. This is the fundamental law of wealth creation that Whitemarsh Hall teaches us. And it's a law that applies whether you have $100 million or $100,000. This isn't philosophy. This is mathematics. Every dollar spent on display is a dollar not invested. Every dollar not invested is roughly $7 you won't have in 20 years at average market returns. The opportunity cost of luxury is exponential. Let me show you what this means in practice. Look at Warren Buffett, one of the richest men in the world, worth over $100 billion, lives in the same house in Omaha he bought in 1958 for $31,500, drives a modest car, eats at McDonald's. His wealth compounded because he wasn't spending it on display. Every dollar he didn't spend on mansions and yachts got invested and grew. His house represents 0.00003% of his net worth. Stotesbury's houses represented 10% of his net worth. That's the difference. Look at the Walton family, heirs to the Walmart fortune. The richest family in America, worth over $200 billion collectively. They're not building 100-room palaces. They're reinvesting in business. They're maintaining reasonable lifestyles relative to their wealth. Their fortune grows generationally because they are not burning capital on display. They understand that wealth compounds when you don't interrupt the compounding. Look at John D. Rockefeller. Wealthiest American in history. Built Kaiquit, a 40-room house, modest by Gilded Age standards. Meanwhile, his peers built 100-room palaces. His wealth survived. Theirs didn't. The Rockefeller fortune still exists today, 5 generations later. Most of his competitors' fortunes disappeared within 1 generation. Compare this to Stotesbury. If he had maintained a reasonable lifestyle, say, spending $300,000 per year instead of $3 million, and invested the difference, his wealth would have survived the Depression intact. That $2.7 million in annual savings, invested from 1921 to 1929, would have compounded to over $30 million before the crash. Even with the crash, even with poor timing, he would have had more wealth at the end than he started with, but he chose display over accumulation. He chose appearance over substance. For 9 years, Whitemarsh Hall was the site of lavish balls and receptions. 9 years of glory, 26 years of decline, then 59 years as a cautionary tale, then complete erasure. The mathematics are clear. If your expenses grow with your income, you'll never build lasting wealth. If your expenses grow faster than your income, which is what happens when you lock in fixed costs during boom times, you're guaranteeing your own destruction. The velocity matters. The fixed nature of the expenses matters. The inability to scale down quickly matters. Real wealth is invisible. The truly wealthy don't need to prove it. They don't need the 100-room mansion. They don't need the staff of 70. They don't need the parties for 800 guests. They have confidence in their actual financial position. They don't need external validation. They understand that the scoreboard is their net worth, not their lifestyle. Stotesbury needed validation. Eva catapulted him into Philadelphia elite society. He went from being J.P. Morgan's number 2, wealthy but relatively private, to being the host of the most lavish parties in America. He went from living in a comfortable townhouse to maintaining 3 palaces. That need for social validation cost him everything. And here's the painful irony. After all that spending, after building the 3rd largest house in America, after hosting the most expensive parties of the era, what did people remember? They remembered the demolition. They remembered the failure. They remembered the financial collapse. The display didn't create a positive legacy. It created a cautionary tale. If Stotesbury had lived modestly and donated his wealth to charity, we'd remember him as a great philanthropist. If he'd invested wisely and passed on his fortune, we'd remember him as the founder of a great American dynasty. Instead, we remember him, if we remember him at all, as the man who built the house that was too expensive to keep. Display destroyed even his reputation along with his wealth. Let's recap the destruction in pure numbers, because these numbers tell the complete story of how extreme wealth can vanish in a single generation. Construction cost, $10 million in 1921, equivalent to $160 million today. Sale price, $167,000 in 1943, equivalent to about $3 million today. Loss on the property, 98.3%, nearly total destruction of value. Personal fortune, $100 million in 1927, equivalent to $1.8 billion today. Estate value at death, $4 million in 1938, equivalent to $100 million today. Loss on net worth, 96%. From the top 10 wealthiest Americans to barely making the list of millionaires. Annual maintenance cost, $1 million per year at Whitemarsh alone, equivalent to $18 million today. Total annual expenses across all 3 estates, approximately $3 million per year, equivalent to $54 million today. Years of profitable operation, 9 from 1921 to 1930. Years until closure, 11 when the mansion was shuttered in 1932. Years until demolition, 59 when it was completely destroyed in 1980. Staff employed at peak, 110 people across the Whitemarsh property. Staff retained by Eva after Stotesbury's death, almost none. Most were let go after over 20 years of service. The human cost of financial collapse extends beyond the family. Liquidation timeline. $55 million withdrawn from accounts between 1933 and 1938. That's $11 million per year on average. That's liquidating roughly 22% of his remaining net worth annually. Unsustainable by any measure. Today, 183 townhouses called Stotesbury Estates sit on the property. Average price, $400,000. Total development value, approximately $73 million. Less than half of what the original construction would cost today. The land appreciated over time. The palace didn't just lose value, it became worthless, then became a liability, then was demolished to make the land valuable again. The irony is staggering. The developer who demolished Whitemarsh Hall made more money building townhouses on the land than Stotesbury ever recovered from building the palace. The subdivision generated more economic value than the mansion. Density and affordability beat grandeur and exclusivity. And nobody's talking about this because the lessons are too uncomfortable, because they challenge how we think about wealth, success, and status, because they reveal that most of what we're taught about making it leads directly to financial destruction. Because admitting this truth means admitting that our culture's obsession with luxury and display is fundamentally destructive. The great irony is that Stotesbury was one of the most successful bankers in American history. He worked at Drexel and Company for over 55 years. J.P. Morgan said he knew more about banking than anyone in America. He understood finance better than almost anyone alive. He could calculate returns, assess risk, and structure deals in his sleep, and he still fell into this trap. Because the trap isn't about intelligence. It's not about financial literacy. It's about psychology. It's about the need for validation. It's about confusing net worth with spending capacity. It's about locking in fixed costs during temporary boom periods. It's about the inability to distinguish between wealth and the appearance of wealth. Even the smartest financial minds can fall victim to lifestyle inflation when ego gets involved. Even people who understand compound interest can destroy their fortunes through status competition. Even experts in risk management can take catastrophic personal financial risks. Whitemarsh Hall was demolished in 1980. It remains the largest American house ever to be demolished on purpose. The third largest private residence in U.S. history. 147 rooms, 100,000 square feet, $10 million in construction costs, gone completely. Every marble stair, every crystal chandelier, every gilt mirror, every imported tapestry, demolished and hauled away. And with it went the cautionary tale that could have prevented thousands of similar financial disasters. Because we don't teach this story. We don't study it in business schools. We don't reference it in financial planning courses. We let it disappear along with the house. But now you know the story. You understand the pattern. You see how display destroys wealth while savings builds it. You recognize the trap of fixed costs on variable income. You know why the truly wealthy live below their means while those desperate to appear wealthy live beyond them. The question is what you do with this knowledge. Because the same forces that destroyed Stotesbury's fortune are working on your finances right now. The pressure to upgrade when you get a raise, the temptation to display success through material goods, the belief that you can afford it because you're earning it right now, the social media comparison that makes you feel inadequate unless you're showing wealth, the credit card offers that arrive after every promotion, the mortgage broker who tells you that you can afford more house, the car salesman who focuses on monthly payments instead of total cost. These forces are mathematical laws. They produce predictable outcomes. They work the same way whether you're worth $100 million or $100,000. The scale changes. The principles don't. Whitemarsh Hall isn't just history, it's prophecy. It's a preview of what happens when anyone, at any income level, locks in fixed luxury expenses and assumes variable income will continue forever. And the only question is whether you'll learn from it or repeat it. Will you be the person who builds wealth slowly and keeps it? Or will you be the person who earns millions and dies broke because you couldn't resist the temptation to prove your success to people who don't care about you? The choice is yours. The mathematics are already decided. The outcome is predictable. And somewhere in suburban Philadelphia, 183 townhouses sit on land that once held the third greatest house in America. a permanent reminder that all that glitters isn't gold. Sometimes it's just expensive paint covering a financially unsustainable structure that will eventually collapse under its own weight. Display destroys wealth. Savings builds it. Whitemarsh Hall proved it. The numbers don't lie.